been through a lot together.
We've got a timeline for it now, and the time is it's now.
It began not with a statement, but with a sight. Nicole Kidman stepping into the light for the first time since the marriage. Everyone called Unbreakable finally broke. No ring, no scripted smiles, just the composed face of someone who has rehearsed this moment in private and is now living it in public. By then, the paperwork existed, quietly filed in Davidson County after 19 years, with the clinical phrase irreconcilable differences, standing in for 1,000 late-night conversations. Sources around her describe a long campaign to hold the center, a determination to save the home she built after losing another one decades earlier. In the end, resolve met reality. She chose to leave. News traveled one way, but reaction traveled too. Within days, Keith Urban stepped on stage for his first show since everything changed. The ring finger told its own story, bare, and the set list did the rest. Love songs once pointed toward Nicole were either softened or gone. A familiar lyric tightened into something sharper, as if the melody could carry what he wasn't ready to say out loud. Fans felt the temperature shift in real time. Nostalgia in one chorus, sandpaper in the next. It wasn't a press conference, it was a reckoning scored in 4/4. What collapsed in that window wasn't just a marriage, it was an emblem. For almost 2 decades, they had served as the counter-argument to tabloid cynicism. Oscar royalty and a Nashville headliner who survived the first storms and built a life around second chances. Red carpets became shorthand for devotion. Candid airport photos passed as proof of ordinary tenderness. But the transcript makes a simple, harder point. The image broke because the people inside it were breaking. Nicole's first appearance set the tone, measured, deliberate, unbeholden to spectacle, signaling that her side would emerge not in interviews, but in choices. The court filings underscored it further. Stability for the daughters prioritized. Finances kept separate. The language pared down to what a judge needs to read. Before the couture gowns and Oscar night stillness, there was a child who blushed so hard her teachers thought she might disappear. Nicole Mary Kidman arrived in Honolulu by accident of timing. Australian parents working abroad. Then grew up in Sydney, in a home where science and service sat at the dinner table. A psychologist, biochemist father, a nurse educator mother. The house prized discipline and curiosity. Nicole carried both, but her temperament tilted inward. Words stalled in classrooms. Feelings didn't. She learned to route them through movement first. Ballet classes that taught restraint and line. Then to drama lessons where restraint could be broken on cue. On small stages and in youth theater groups, the shy girl discovered a loophole. If a character spoke, she didn't have to. Australia in the late 70s and early 80s was blooming with screen opportunity, and Nicole stepped toward it with the concentration of a student who knows rehearsal is the only luck that matters. The first camera work came in TV movies and miniseries, patchwork jobs that teach an actor to find truth between lunch breaks and lighting resets. She was tall, porcelain, unmistakable in a crowd. That got her noticed. What kept her on sets was the way she could move from brittle to tender in a breath. Casting directors saw it before audiences did. There was range here, not just a look. Then BMX Bandits, 1983, put her on the pop culture map, a cult thriller with bikes, chase scenes, and that copper hair catching the sun as she sprinted through Sydney's tunnels. It wasn't prestige, it was momentum. And momentum is a currency young actors spend carefully. With each gig, she stacked proof that the camera didn't frighten her anymore. By the late 80s, the calls started arriving with American zip codes. Hollywood wanted the poise, but also the volatility. The sense that a scene might tilt because her character decided it should. It arrives as a fault line. Nicole Kidman marries Tom Cruise in 1990 and walks straight into a furnace of attention. 2 rising stars sealed into a single headline. At first, it looks like ascension, bigger sets, global press tours, a life measured in premieres and opening weekends. But proximity to fame isn't the same as safety. The marriage exists inside a gravity well. Tom's faith, Scientology, exerts a pull that the public only glimpses from the edges. Nicole rarely narrates that period herself, which says as much as any quote could. What the transcript makes clear is consequence. When the marriage ends in 2001, she doesn't just lose a partner. She loses primary custody of Isabella and Connor, the children they adopted together. That is the wound that explains later choices. Friends describe a woman standing in a quiet house, hearing the shape of an absence most people never have to map. It isn't a tabloid twist. It's a rupture in daily life. Breakfasts, school runs, the low hum of ordinary motherhood suddenly lived at a distance. For someone whose shyness had long ago learned how to speak by pretending to be other people, this becomes the role she cannot play. Mother, fully present every morning. She keeps working. Work is steady, mercifully indifferent to heartbreak, and the performances grow flintier, more precise. But privately, a conviction hardens. The next home will be built like a fortress around the children inside it. This resolve sets the stage for Keith Urban before Keith ever enters the frame. When she later gravitates toward him, it isn't just attraction, it's architecture. She's engineering stability after years of living inside a spotlight that answered to someone else's map. The appeal of Keith, talented, vulnerable, in need of anchoring, touches both the artist and the parent in her. She wants the family she lost, and the partnership she didn't have. A house with doors that close on chaos and open for laughter. So when the "we" says she fought to save the marriage nearly 2 decades later, it's not rhetoric. It's a through line. A woman who once watched custody slip through her fingers decides she will never again be casual with love or home. The scar from 2001 doesn't fade. It becomes the compass point by which she measures every storm that follows. Keith Urban is a kid from New Zealand raised in Australia, who finds his reflection not in surf culture, but in twang and heartbreak. Country music, a niche language in suburban Queensland, becomes his first passport. A father pushing a guitar across the table. A 6-year-old learning chord shapes. A teenager trading classrooms for pub stages. These are the early beats. The promise is obvious, and so is the risk. Keith chooses the narrow bridge. No plan B, only the next gig. Nashville in the early 90s doesn't hand out citizenship. It makes you earn it. He grinds, songwriting rooms, opening slots, radio station hallways at dawn, and then the turn arrives. By 1999, the self-titled American debut lands. The marketing calls him a heartthrob. The records prove he's a technician too, a guitarist whose runs carry both flash and ache. The mainstream hears it and moves closer. Awards appear, so do the late nights that usually come with them. The transcript doesn't romanticize that part. Alcohol enters like a shortcut. Other substances follow. What starts as relief from the whiplash of touring, hotel silence after arena noise, becomes an undertow. Rehab, out. Relapse, in. A carousel that keeps spinning even as the plaques go up on the wall. By the time he meets Nicole in 2005, Keith is 2 men at once. The first can walk into a studio and build a hook from air, can command a crowd with a grin and a downstroke, can turn a bridge into confession without sounding maudlin. The second is terrified of losing the life the first one created. He knows the math. One bad week can trash a year's worth of discipline. Fame amplifies both sides. More access, more scrutiny, more temptation, more pressure to prove he's past it. This is the lens that makes their pairing legible later. To Nicole, he reads as talent wrapped in fragility, someone worth protecting. To Keith, she reads as proof that stability is possible, discipline with warmth, a center of gravity he's never had. Yet the same traits that pull them together foreshadow friction. Her instinct is to structure, to build routines that keep storms outside. His instinct is to run hot, tour hard, write late, live in the improvisation that makes great records and bad decisions. When their paths finally crossed, the headline wrote itself. Two Australians with parallel birthdays and opposite energies, meeting at the exact moment both needed a different future. But beneath the symmetry was something messier and more binding. Nicole arrived with a vow formed in the ashes of her first marriage. Build a home so steady, no storm can pry it loose. Keith arrived with a different pledge. Don't let the demons undo the life the music just gave him. That shared hunger for redemption made the first weeks feel preordained. At the G'day USA Gala, he was polite and distant. She assumed he wasn't interested. Months later, the call came, and the tempo snapped to allegro. When it worked, it really worked. She gave structure without smothering the spark. He gave spontaneity to a life that had learned to survive by control. Together, they created a climate where both could exhale. But chemistry and compatibility aren't synonyms. The very traits that magnetize them carried a warning label. Nicole's instinct, born of loss, was to set guardrails, routines, boundaries, plans that made chaos bounce off the walls. Keith's creative engine was improvisation. Late-night writing jags, tour surges, the adrenaline of a crowd solving problems he wasn't ready to face in daylight. Her steadiness could feel to him like surveillance. His freedom could read to her as drift. Each was partly right. In the early glow, their differences felt like balance. He softened her days with music and mischief. She softened his nights with order and calm. The transcript is careful here. This wasn't savior and patient cosplay. It was mutual, adult, and for a while it was healing. Yet a pressure built under the rituals. She needed the marriage to be a harbor. No more sudden losses, no more custody heartbreaks. He needed the marriage not to become another arena where he was graded on recovery. They were trying to build the same house, but from opposite ends of the blueprint. So the click was real, and so was the clash. Nicole loved the vulnerability that made Keith's songs ache, but feared the instability that sometimes trailed it. Keith loved the strength that made Nicole's life hold, but chafed when that strength felt like management. In quieter moments, they knew it. The miracle was that they found each other at all. The challenge was learning how to stay without asking the other to change the thing that made them who they were. From the outside, the story sprinted straight to happily ever after. January 2005 brings the first photographs. By June 2006, they are standing in a candlelit Sydney chapel, vows echoing under a vaulted ceiling, her in Balenciaga, and a veil like a cloud. Him with the troubadour hair and the look of a man who can finally exhale. The guest list sparkles, but the mood is intimate. A hometown benediction for two Australians who somehow found each other in the loudest corners of America. At the reception, he sings to her. Cameras catch the kind of smile that usually exists only in memory. For a moment, the narrative feels healed. She has rebuilt the family dream. He has found a reason to come home. Then, 4 months later, the fairy tale meets an old antagonist. Keith checks himself into rehab for alcohol, a sentence that lands like a dropped plate in a quiet kitchen. It isn't a scandal, it's a confession. Nicole is barely past the thank you notes when the familiar machinery of crisis spins up again. Schedules rearranged, press managed, a private promise made public by necessity. She chooses loyalty without fanfare. She visits, keeps the perimeter calm, refuses the tabloid theater. In later interviews, he credits her with saving his life during that stretch. The transcript reads it more soberly, as the moment their marriage chose its operating system. From then on, us means contingency plans. They try practical rules. Never apart for too long. Anchor to the same city when possible. Say yes to ordinary routines whenever the calendar allows. She keeps acting. Australia, rabbit hole, prestige and range. While he tours, collects awards, and keeps the band moving. In public, the affection is easy and fluent. Hand squeezes on award show carpets, thanks that sound improvised, even if they've been practiced in green rooms. But the first crack leaves a seam you can feel even when you can't see it. Rehab so early installs a quiet fear in the walls. Will stability hold when the road gets loud again? Nicole's instinct is to fortify. Structure, boundaries, a family rhythm's ebo to outrun chaos. Keith's instinct is to earn it in motion. Play harder, write deeper, prove the relapse was a detour, not a map. For years, the system works well enough that outsiders call it inspiring. Inside, it requires constant tending. A vigilance that doesn't scream but never fully sleeps. The wedding gave them a myth. The fourth month taught them the maintenance cost. After the first storm, they leaned into routine like it was medicine. Work never stopped. Couldn't, really, but they tried to braid their calendars so the distance felt planned, not punitive. She chased roles that stretched her without swallowing her, toggling from sweeping epics to intimate grief studies. He took his place where he'd always belonged, on the road and in the studio, stacking radio hits and Grammys with the polish of a veteran and the hunger of a newcomer. Somewhere inside that churn, they made the decision that would redefine the house. Sunday Rose in 2008, Faith Margaret in 2010. Nicole, still carrying the phantom ache of an earlier family lost, poured herself into the ordinary. School routines, bedtime negotiations, the small rituals that make a kitchen feel like sanctuary. Publicly, it read like redemption with a soundtrack. The airport photos became a genre. Nicole, daughters in tow, Keith trundling behind with gear. Red carpets where his thanks landed on her shoulder. Interviews where she called him the man who brought me back to life, and he framed her as the axis he spun around. The image didn't feel manufactured. It felt curated. Two professionals controlling what the world got to keep. When awards shows rolled tape of him weeping through tributes, the crowd saw a marriage that had survived something deep and chosen tenderness anyway. Privately, the maintenance never quite eased. The rule about not staying apart too long met the reality of film shoots and tours. Sometimes the calendar won. Nicole's need for predictability, shaped by the custody loss she refused to repeat, could harden into vigilance. Keith's need to feel like more than a recovery project could harden into resistance. Even parenting style exposed the seam. She favored structure and buffers from the circus. He leaned toward ease, levity, and say yes memories. None of it was catastrophic. All of it was cumulative. And yet, for nearly a decade, they kept the balance convincing. The family unit became both sanctuary and symbol, a private answer to old wounds and a public narrative that comforted fans who wanted proof that love could outwork addiction, distance, and fame. They weren't faking it. They were carrying it together while the weight slowly grew. By the mid-2010s, the story they'd sold so well began to sell them back. The pedestal they'd climbed, slowly hand in hand, turned into a narrow perch where every step felt graded. Rumors were the background hum. Snags over schedules. Late nights Keith enjoyed and Nicole distrusted. Her intensity misread as control. His need for oxygen misread as indifference. They answered as they always had. Together, composed. The language of stronger than ever, ready for microphones. But even the most graceful choreography leaves blisters. Friends describe a quieter arithmetic wearing them down. The cost of being each other's answer year after year. Nicole had spent a decade bracing the frame. Watchful, organized, determined that their daughters would never feel the kind of absence she once lived through. Keith was grateful, sometimes radiant with it, and then suddenly prickly when the gratitude sounded like a script that made him the project instead of the partner. He wanted equal footing, to be trusted without proving the same test every month. She wanted peace that didn't require constant negotiation. Neither demand was unreasonable. Both were exhausting. Parenting exposed the seam without ever tearing it. Nicole preferred structure. Early nights, guarded circles, a home that felt like a buffer against the noise. Keith leaned playful. Yes to late ice cream. Yes to impromptu guitar lessons on the couch. Yes to being the fun memory after a week apart. The girls loved both versions. The parents sometimes winced at each other's. No slammed doors, just accumulating differences, the kind that don't headline but do erode. Meanwhile, the brand held. Photos from carpets and arenas kept telling a comforting story, and they let it. Partly because it was still true on good days, partly because hope is easier to maintain when the world believes with you. But hope can weigh as much as fear. They had become custodians of a fairy tale that needed constant care. Smile here, touch there, say the line that reminds everyone, including yourselves, why this worked. In private, the recalculations multiplied. In public, the posture never slipped. That gap, sincere and exhausting at once, was the pressure they woke to and fell asleep under, long before any lawyer typed the words irreconcilable differences. By 2023, the music under their story had changed key. Sightings multiplied of them living together but apart, a phrase that sounds gentle until you try it for a year. Schedules stopped dovetailing. Red carpets turned selective. She showed up solo more often, poised, ring present one week, pocketed the next, while he leaned harder into the road, a place where the feedback is immediate and the questions fewer. Interviews grew careful. The old lines, "Never been stronger," "She's my everything," still appeared, but they landed like covers of earlier hits rather than new material. What finally happened in late September 2025 wasn't explosive, it was administrative, which can be its own kind of thunder. In Davidson County, Tennessee, where their family home anchored the map, Nicole filed for divorce after 19 years. The documents read like a calm room after a storm. Irreconcilable differences, no spousal support, no child support. Signals that their finances had long been disentangled. The request that mattered was residency. Primary residential custody for Nicole, with joint decision-making preserved for both parents. Stability wasn't a slogan, it was the plan. For a woman who once felt motherhood slip beyond her reach, the priority was unmistakable. Keep the girls' days predictable while the headlines churn. Behind the formality lay fatigue and a kind of mercy. Friends say there was no final shattering event, only a slow acceptance that love had become labor neither could sustain in the way it deserved. She was tired of being equal parts partner and caretaker. He was tired of being measured against yesterday's mistakes when today's steps were steady. The filing wasn't revenge, it was a release. Then came the stage, which has always been Keith's confessional. At the first show after the news broke, the ring was absent and the script revised. A set list quietly retired. The Fighter, a song once braided with their story, while an older breakup lyric sharpened into unreasonable reasons, a phrase that carried its own sting. He balanced the bite with a slideshow of his daughters during Heart Like a Hometown, reminding the crowd and himself what remained sacred. The performance felt less like PR and more like processing in public, where melody can say what statements cannot. So the myth that once sold hope distilled into filings and a few deliberate choices. A courthouse in Tennessee, a bare hand gripping a microphone, and two parents parsing the future into what must be protected and what must be let go. The fairy tale didn't collapse. It concluded formally with signatures and a custody map designed to keep the center quiet for the only audience that now truly matters. The divorce didn't end with a press cycle. It unfolded as two parallel performances, hers in quiet focus, his in amplified confession. Nicole's response was calibrated rather than spoken. She surfaced at a festival without a ring, eyes steady, posture unassailable, as if to say the story would be told in conduct, not quotes. Paparazzi followed her through Nashville sidewalks where she walked between Sunday and faith, hands joined, pace unhurried. The picture of a mother rerouting a family in real time. The filings had already revealed the framework. Primary residential custody with joint decisions shared. In practice, that looked like school runs, gentler schedules, and a house that shuts the noise out at bedtime. After losing daily mothering once in her life, she was intent on protecting it now. Work became the other pillar. Projects chosen for craft and timing, not splash. Proof that she could hold the career line without letting it swallow the kitchen table. Keith, meanwhile, kept processing where he always has. On stage. The first run of shows after the split played like open-heart surgery in 3-minute intervals. Fans watched the set lists morph. Songs once tied to Nicole set aside. A breakup lyric sharpened here. A slideshow of his daughters threaded there. The ringless hand around the mic became its own motif, as did the visible swings between bravado, ache, and gratitude. He talked between numbers about the kid who left school for bar gigs, about parents who said chase it, about the way music steadied him when nothing else did. It was part testimony, part therapy, and wholly Keith. Messy, musical, never dull. The media did what media does, assigned roles, built a morality play, invited the audience to keep score. But the transcript closes that door gently. This isn't vindication for one or condemnation for the other. It's a logistical miracle attempted for 19 years by two people who really tried. In the end, the center of gravity changes. Nicole's orbit tightens around two teenagers and the work that keeps her sane. Keith's orbit tightens around stages where truth can be sung even when it can't be neatly said. What remains are choices that don't trend but do endure. A custody plan that privileges calm. A career rhythm that respects sleep. A set list that honors what's gone without mocking it. The fairy tale isn't reversed so much as archived. And if the image once sustained the marriage, the reality now sustains the family. She protects the home. He plays the heart out. The girls see two adults finishing something hard with as much grace as they can manage.